I recently returned from my trip to Iceland. Stick around, this will be a comprehensive guide to what we saw and did in our roughly 9 or so days traveling there. We started off our trip by flying into the Keflavik airport. It's important to know that there are two main airports that you'll fly into in Iceland, either Keflavik or Reykjavik. They're about 45 minutes apart by car. If you're renting a car, I just recommend picking a place that's close to whichever airport you're gonna fly into. If you do need to get between the airports, you can take a taxi, which is very expensive, or you can schedule a fly bus. But either way, it's a lot easier just to make sure your transportation is near the airport. We decided to rent a camper van for our trip, and we went with a company called Cuckoo Campers. All in all, I'd say I had a really good experience with Cuckoo Campers. No major issues with the camper itself or anything like that. They were only 10 minutes away from the airport, and they even picked us up at the airport and carried us in a shuttle to go get our camper van. By the time we finally hit the road in our van, it was around noon. We headed to our first destination, which was a natural hot spring. The hot spring was around an hour and a half from Keflavik. We planned around 3 hours total. It was a 45-minute hike there, a 45-minute hike back, and then just, however much time you want to spend in the actual hot spring. I think this was a really fun just introduction to Iceland. On the hike up there, you just see a lot of steam coming up out of the mountains. There were pools of boiling mud, and then just the landscape around you is really incredible. So from there, we drove for another hour and a half or so to reach the Gullfoss waterfall. Of all the waterfalls that we saw on this trip, I think Gullfoss was probably my favorite. It's really unique in that there's a great vantage point of it from above. This was a very easy and accessible destination to check out, even if you're short on time. After you pull into the parking lot, there's a very short walk to the high point where you can overlook the waterfall. And then if you have more time, you can follow the stairs down and go along a path to reach a much closer view of the waterfall. Gullfoss was our last big stop of the day. So after we checked it out, we headed to our very first campground. This trip was actually a work trip for us. We coordinated with a horseback riding facility called Icelandic Horse World to shoot a video for my wife's YouTube channel, which is called Equine Helper. So the next day we spent from around 9 till 11:30 or 12 doing the private horseback riding tour at Icelandic Horse World. This was a really fun experience. I was on the ground most of the time capturing footage, but the landscape is absolutely beautiful. 1 out of every 3 people in Iceland has a horse, and that definitely makes sense when you see just how many there are throughout the country. So day 2 was a big waterfall day for us. This first one we saw was really cool because there's a path that goes all the way around it that allows you to view it from every angle. You definitely want to be wearing rain gear. There's a ton of spray that comes off of them. Very close to this first waterfall is another iconic one, and you have to go through a little cave to get to it. If you want to reach this one, just keep in mind you'll have to walk through around maybe a foot or so of water to get to it. So a quick 30-minute drive from those last 2 waterfalls, you'll come to Skogafoss. Skogafoss is just another breathtaking sight. If you want to spend some more time there, there's a path that goes all the way up to the top of it, so you can check it out from there. So from there, we drove for around an hour to reach Rainness Viera beach. This is a black sand beach where you can see some really crazy rock formations in the form of basalt pillars. Something we both really loved at this stop was just walking along the beach and looking at the beautiful stones that have been smoothed out by the ocean. So our original plan was to stop for the night at Vik, which is really close to this black sand beach, but we decided to keep driving this day and camp a bit closer to our first destination of the next day. So about an hour from Vik is the next place that we stopped, which was this large and beautiful canyon. There's a short but very steep hike to get up to the good viewpoint of the canyon. One thing I'll mention is right after we finished getting our pictures, really heavy fog rolled in and messed up the view of everything in the surrounding area. So maybe just keep that in mind and plan for a little extra time if you need to wait for the weather to clear up. After checking out the canyon, we drove for another hour or so to reach the Skaftafell Visitor Center. Here we did an hour-and-a-half hike that takes you to a small glacier lagoon with a really cool view of a glacier off in the distance. The hike was very easy with mostly paved paths all the way there. Our plan after this hike was to drive for another 49 minutes to reach the main glacier lagoon you'll see in Iceland. That is also really close to the Diamond Beach. There's this incredible vantage point of a massive glacier on the way there. So we decided to pull over and then do a very short walk up to a ridge where you could get some great views of the glacier. So after that quick stop, we made it to the Glacier Lagoon. If you feel like it, there are actually boat tours that go through the lagoon. One thing I wish I would have known is there's a parking lot beside the Diamond Beach that you can park there, as there were not as many people there, and then you could walk over to the Glacier Lagoon. We jumped back in our car and did another hour-and-a-half drive to reach Vestro camping, which is our campground for the night. We both loved this campground and it was one of our favorite stops. If I could do this trip again, I might plan like a full day just for Vestro so I could do the hike that goes closer to the mountain. There's also a lighthouse that you can walk or drive to, and then there are some seals that you can see. There's also a Viking village set where they filmed some of season 3 of The Witcher that you can walk to. So after our night in Vestro we woke up and we drove for 3 hours to reach this scenic farmstead where we planned on getting lunch. The drive to the scenic farmstead from Vestro was pretty sketchy. You're driving up a mountain a lot of the ways on a dirt road, and the day that we were doing it, it was incredibly foggy and you couldn't see more than like 20 feet in any direction. But the roads were good enough for us to get there and everything worked out fine. There's a restaurant there that opens around 11 that offers tons of different traditional Icelandic food for you to try. If you get there early and you're waiting for the restaurant to open like we were, there's a really short walk down to some ruins that you can see for an old monastery that used to be there. After we grabbed lunch, we drove for an hour and 45 minutes or so to reach Stuthlagill Canyon. To reach Stuthlagill Canyon, you do have to drive on some pretty rough roads. Depending on what side of the canyon you park on, you might have a really short walk down some really steep stairs, or you'll have a really long walk to reach the view of the canyon. So just depending on your schedule, you'll want to keep this in mind so you make sure you end up on the right side of the canyon for you. We drove for an hour and 11 minutes to reach the next place that we were going to stop for the night. And I think this next stop was both of our favorite campground for the whole trip. I'll put the name of it on the screen so you can go check it out. But you're just up in the highlands and the view around you is just so beautiful. At the end of the trip, this is one of the places we wish that we had spent maybe just an entire day just relaxing and enjoying the different hikes that were there. So the next day, we continued for an hour and 24 minutes on some rough dirt roads to reach Dettifoss, which is a large waterfall that was featured in the movie Prometheus. We drove for another hour and 20 minutes to reach the town of Husavik, which is a town you might know from the movie Eurovision on Netflix. This was a really cool town that's a popular launching point for a bunch of whale tours, which you'll see all the boats in the harbor. We had a really nice stop here, just grabbing some lunch and exploring the town a little bit before we kept driving. After Husavik, we drove for an hour and 4 minutes to reach Croftler, which is an active volcanic caldera with a short hike up to the top of it where you can get a really nice view. From there, we had a short drive to the Myvatten nature baths. This was our paid hot spring experience on the trip. I think it was around $40 per person. After the baths, we were ready to turn in for the night, and so we headed to our campsite, which was also in Myvatten. The next morning we woke up and we hiked to the top of a volcano. After that, we went to another local hike where you could see some lava tubes. So after our activities in Myvatten that morning, we drove to the largest city in the north of Iceland and grabbed some lunch there. And then we kept driving all the way back to Reykjavik, where we planned on camping for the night. After our night in Reykjavik, we drove back to a large national park that's a part of the Golden Circle, where you can see where the two tectonic plates meet. We spent most of the day at the national park, and then we decided to drive all the way back to a campsite in Keflavik. So the next day, we needed to be close to Keflavik so we could return our car. So we just spent the day exploring there. We found a small geothermal area that was cool. Near to there was a big lighthouse that you could walk to, as well as a beach with a large cliff. So the very last thing we saw was the Viking Museum that's in Keflavik. From there, we headed back to Cuckoo Campers to return our camper. They were nice enough to take us in a shuttle to our hotel where we stayed the night, and then the next morning we got up and went to the airport and just waited for our flight. I just made an Instagram account for this channel where I've been sharing a lot of travel pictures and whatnot. You can check it out. I'll put it on the screen here. Please give me a thumbs up if this was useful for you, and I'll see you guys in the next video.